Today's date is February 15th, 2022. We are literally on pins and needles right now across the globe, preparing for the very unwanted possibility of a war between the United States and Russia and all of the allies between. This will not go well. This is not wanted, and we're all more than a little wound up about this. Now, the reality is that the possibility of war is very real this year, whether it's ourselves or other people. It's just, we are on the precipice of great change, and this is one more culmination of that evolutionary push to get around the corner and move on with things. The choice about whether we end up in a war here or elsewhere in the world is literally with us, you and I, the common person. So if you believe that your thoughts can create reality, if you believe that what you focus on in life with your thoughts and your vision can create the world that you're going to live in, that can create your future, that you are not a mindless drone who is a slave to the stars and your entire life is predestined and you have no control over it. If you believe that your mind is the beginning and the end of where you end up in your life and how you deal with the circumstances in it, then you must also know that your belief systems and what you are willing to believe and your mind right now and what you focus on can also help turn the ship. We can change the course of events. We may feel powerless, but we are not powerless. Together as a group, we are a mighty force for good. And more than ever before, now is the time for all of us to get our mind right and to change the direction of this ship. We can do it. Or we can choose to do nothing except wring our hands and worry and fret and have angst and talk about it as if it were a very real possibility and there was nothing we could do, and end up there that way too. So this video is going to discuss the charts of Biden and Putin and the Ukraine, but specifically Biden and Putin and their involvement with each other. But also, in order for us to understand that, we're actually going to go backward in time a little bit, and we're going to look at Trump, the Trump administration, and the United States charts to get an understanding of how some of these mechanisms might be working in terms of national charts and astrology and the directions we can and can't go, and also evolutionary demand as evidenced by both the national leaders we choose as well as the astrology charts that reflect what's happening. Here are the charts for Joseph Biden and Vladimir Putin. For those of you who do astrology at home, if you want to set up the charts, the birth information is as follows. Joseph Biden, November 20th, 1942, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Reported time is 8:30 a.m. Vladimir Putin, October 7th, 1952, St. Petersburg, Russia. Reported time 9:30 a.m. So for those of you who are new to astrology or who don't do astrology, some things you should know is, one, you don't actually need a time of birth to get a lot of information from a chart, especially a synastry chart or a relationship chart, a compatibility chart. So don't fret if you personally don't know your own time of birth or you're not sure what to do with that. All the information we need literally is going to come primarily out of just the planets, and that's just by knowing the date of birth. Whew, okay, so before we get deeply into these charts, and we're using these two specific charts because this is clearly a pissing contest between Biden and Putin. So we got the two dogs literally going at each other from across the fence, and making the rest of us hella nervous, right? So the first thing when we look at a compatibility chart is we want to see, right, and just looking at the planets, we want to see if there are any obvious sources of sympathy or antipathy between these two people, right? And listen, especially with male charts, because men are Mars ruled. When men have conflicts between the charts that are very obvious, it's also very obvious in real life as well. Huge competitive, like rams butting heads sort of thing. Luckily for us, that is not the case here. These two are not bosom buddies. But at the same time, they are not so antipathetic, so unfriendly to each other that we have to worry about, the two of them using the rest of us as a battering ram to beat each other with. Thank God, because I'm really not interested in watching more children go off to war to get killed so other people can make a profit. Okay, so with both of them, here's what's similar, right? Both of them have heavy 12th house emphasis. This means that both of them are very accustomed to doing things behind closed doors. There's a lot of smoky backroom dealings that go on with these two that they're extremely comfortable and well versed in. Surprisingly, with a heavy 12th house emphasis, this can also mean either a very strongly developed spiritual nature or religious focus, and or it can represent delusion and mental health issues, or both. Remember, schizophrenics frequently believe that they're Jesus, or that they're talking to God, or that angels gave them orders, or demons, whatever. Like, there's a lot of religious messages that come through in the delusions of schizophrenic people who are actively psychotic. So the 12th house, mental health, and religion seem to go hand in hand. Not sure what that's about. Just throwing that out there as an observation. Okay. All right. The other thing that's interesting that they both share a similarity with is they both have an emphasized 8th house, which you would expect to see with politicians, because politicians cannot get elected or into the positions and advance through the ranks that they do without the support of other people. Now, the 8th house typically represents financial support from other people. Here in the United States, we definitely see that. All these conversations we've been having about sponsors and dark money and lobbying and a whole lot of, whose wallet's paying for all this anyway, who's buying the senators, is definitely 8th house stuff that we are now diving into in very vigorous ways, putting it all out on the table these days. So we're seeing it, and we are on a Pluto return, and Pluto rules the underworld and shady backroom dealings and all sorts of stuff that you weren't supposed to see. So it's not unthinkable that with a Pluto returning to its original position at birth, in this case the birth of our nation, that these things are coming up for review and reformation. So that's a happy thought. Okay, but in any event, these two both carry emphasized 8th houses, which again has a lot to do with support from other people, and also a lot of financial support from cough cough interested parties. Now, they both also carry an emphasized 7th house. With that, and here's what's interesting, Biden carries Saturn in the 7th, Putin carries Jupiter in the 7th. So one of the things, let me circle it for you here. One of the things that's interesting about this is that the 7th house represents other people and partnerships. Now, we here in the United States tend to think of Putin as the bad guy for obvious reasons, because he's a legitimately scary person in a lot of ways. And as an astrologer, I'm telling you, he's a legitimately scary person. This yikes. He's like a supervillain, except he's real. Anyway. But the thing about it is the 7th house represents the people that we partner with, right? So with Putin, in spite of how scary he is to us and to astrologers, and to his enemies, obviously, and his challengers, well, to everybody, except, and here's the thing, except the people he partners with Jupiter in that 7th house, he has very strong, supportive alliances with his partners. So whoever Putin actually partners with, and not just marriage partners, these are business partners, these are national partners, whoever he partners with, he's got strong relationships with. And that's something to consider. Now, the thing about it with him is it's a Jupiter-Pluto square across the angles. So one of the things that I would expect is that in many ways, he may actually be beholden to other people who have the purse strings. So, because Jupiter and Pluto represents big money, big, mega money, right? Like we're talking Jeff Bezos money or more. Global, huge wealth, like crazy money. So the thing about it is that Jupiter-Pluto square across the angles in Putin's chart, while he may have a very heavily and supportively financially invested partnership with specific people or entities, let's put it that way, at the same time, because of that square to that 10th house, he may be in many ways indebted to them, or well, owned, I guess is the way to put it. So he may be at the mercy and service of other people who are supporting him. So he may be propped up by the very money people that are making it possible for him, which is funny only because it seems like something we would say about our government here. But the reality is it's the senators here that are being propped up by all the dark money, and we know that. So what our senators are to corporate interests and lobbyists and, the heavily funded with all their insanity, Putin is to very specific individuals. So that may explain also why he's managed to maintain a 20-year reign over Russia as his presidency, which is, yeah, long time. Okay, so now Biden has Saturn in the seventh. So with Saturn in the seventh, what you're going to get typically is you're going to get one of two things. You're either going to get and in much more limited numbers, very loyal partners. So when you find people who are loyal to you, they are loyal to you, right? Because you are also loyal to them. The problem with Saturn in the seventh for anybody who carries that position is that Saturn is angular, it's prominent, and that means that you often get criticized, really criticized. Like you can't sneeze without somebody having something to say about it and critiquing it, making it an issue. So when you attract enemies with Saturn in the seventh, you really attract open, committed enemies. And that's a bit of a problem. Luckily for Biden, unlike Putin, who carries that beautiful Jupiter in seventh, but it's squaring Pluto, right? Biden carries this painful Saturn in the seventh that typically has everybody barking and nipping at his heels with criticism and critiques and lack of support and constant sort of thing. However, he carries it as a trine to that 11th house. So, or I'm sorry, in his angular 10th house as well. So what that means is that he is very good at presenting the right face to the general public. And also, he gets a lot more forgiveness for his misdeeds, in spite of the fact that Saturn is still Saturn sitting in the 7th house. So they both have emphasized 7th house in common as well. I thought that was interesting. Now, the other thing that I wanted to give you guys, now remember we talk about Putin and his final dispositor of his chart is Mars. This guy is Mars, 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 Mars. This man will hurt you. Woo, and he will hurt you with his bare hands if he can bring himself to get his hands dirty. Anyway, I know it's not funny. I'm laughing because I'm nervous. All right, now here's what's interesting. Biden, Mr. Soft Shoe Biden here. Also, when we do all the final dispositors and run down the chart, he also has an emphasized final dispositor of Mars. So both of these characters are Mars characters. That's, yikes, going to be a problem. Because Mars does not like being dominated. Mars does not like surrender. Mars does not like losing. Mars loves competition. Mars loves combat. Mars loves sparring and going at it like two dogs vying for dominance. This is what we have as the current leaders of the two largest nations in the world who are in active dialogue about a potential conflict. So yeah, forgive me if I laugh. I'm a little nervous. And just like you, well, just like some of you, I'm sure you and I have been sharing a lot of insomnia the last few days. So I've been struggling with it, and it's taken me a couple of days to actually get around to doing these charts because it needed to be done, but I'm so stressed out thinking about it. I've had trouble getting my thoughts together to do it. But we're here now, so let's get through it because there are some possibilities for saving ourselves from these two. All right. Okay, now, when it comes to United States chart, there are literally 6 or 7, maybe more, different charts and variations of the chart that different astrologers use because there's no confirmed, discernible time for what is considered the birth of a nation. So as a collective whole, we all agree that July 4th, 1776 is our birthday. So this is the chart that we're going to use as the national chart. Now, the actual time, if you're using houses and ascendants and angles, that gets a little weird as well. So I have two charts here. The one you're looking at here is going to be the rectified chart by the astrologer Zipporah Dobbins. I like her chart. I think there's a lot of merit to it. The standard chart that other people use is a Scorpio rising chart, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. I'm going to use them both because they both have merit. But the most important thing I want you guys to understand is that even if, and especially when, you don't know the actual time of something, the inception of something, or the birth of something, when you don't have the correct or exact time and you're just not sure, it doesn't mean that much. It makes a difference in terms of being able to time and predict events passing. But in terms of the actual meat of the chart, everything you need is right there with the planets and the signs, even without the time for the actual inception or birth of the event or person or entity. So keep that in mind as we go through here. All right, now with the rectified chart with Zipporah Dobbins, which I actually like a lot, just looking at the planetary transits, the United States as a nation is undergoing major, major stress testing. So the first thing I want to show you is right here. Oh, I'll use a different color. Right here, even without the angles or using the time of birth for the nation, right? We have Neptune, we have transiting Neptune, they're in opposition, and they're both setting up a T-square to our natal Mars. Now, for those of you who don't do astrology, this means nothing, I'm sure. But in this particular case, what this is showing us is we already, as a nation, carry a Mars-Neptune square. So we are prone to, well, you know, some game playing with words and some couching and spinning of reality. Our spin doctors in charge of the political process and stuff like that, you know, as a classic example of this game playing this with words, this fantasy making with information. Marketing and advertising is huge in this country. We are probably the best at it in the world. And also Neptune rules the cinema, Hollywood, movies, glamour. So with Mars and Gemini squaring Neptune, what is a big deal here that we're considered one of the best at? Well, fantasy making through images, videos, film, cinema, right? So there are things that we are very, very good at. Mars-Neptune squares are very poetic. They're very good at creating fantasies and images. Boy, if you needed something or someone to glamorize something and make it beautiful and wonderful and appealing, get a Mars-Neptune person to do that for you, because they are absolute artists when it comes to presenting information and tweaking it just the right way to get you to see what they want you to see. Of course, the problem is when it's used for other purposes, it goes from fantasy making for entertainment or poetry and art to basically propaganda manipulation, which, you know, let's face it, we're pretty good at and known for. Now, here's the rub though, right? Transiting Neptune has been all over these two planets setting up a T-square. So what this means is that we have been reaching up to this point critical mass when it comes to things that revolve around information, misinformation, manipulation of information, deliberate obfuscation and hiding of information, game playing with words, game play, spin, the spin doctors. You know, all of these things have been under fire and really brought out into the open and undergoing a major stress test as Neptune has been interacting with these. Now, the good news, and boy, we've seen a lot of that in the last 4 years, right? We're actually not in 4, let's be fair, in the last 12, like this has been building. This is not an overnight thing. This whole business with manipulation of information and the tail wagging the dog and propaganda, all of these things have been building in intensity and abuse for decades now. This is not new. We've just reached critical mass with it now. With that said, Neptune is exact in the opposition to Neptune, to our Neptune as we speak. Mars, luckily, is 1 degree back, so we're past the worst of it. But Neptune is still there with Neptune, so we still have some residual. I don't want to say ignorance, but we still have some residual delusion and delusional thinking and wishful thinking that's happening with this Neptune-Neptune opposition. So that's going to be an issue. Now, if we use the Zipporah Dobbins chart, Neptune is right here on our ascendant or our identity, right? So our national identity is still undergoing a lot of this Neptune wishful thinking, fantasizing, delusion, like literally not tethered to the real world kind of thinking, because that's Neptune. Um, and when we look at what we're dealing with out here, I mean, QAnon, really? John Kennedy never really died. He's going to be back in Dallas any day now. Like, oh my God, it's literally turned into Looneyville out there. The flat earthers. Oh my God. The landing on the moon was all Hollywood stunts. It never happened. Ay, 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 ay. The virus is not real. Let's inject ourselves with bleach and, horse medicine. Oh my God. What you're seeing is Neptune by transit opposing our natal Neptune of national identity. Wow. The good news is we're literally at the peak of it, and from here moving forward, it's all going to subside. Thank God. But man, it has been colorful and not in good ways. Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm. Okay. Now, some other things that we're looking at with this particular chart and the transits. Now, I set these transits up specifically for the day that the phone call was made to the Ukraine between Biden and Putin, because that was a very, very important day. So here, February 12th, 2022, okay, is when this chart is set up. Now, on that day, Venus and Mars are at 13 and 14 Capricorn. This is a very important degree, which we'll get into later as we go through some of the other charts. What is important about this particular transit with Venus and Mars together like this, right, is that it now, because we've got another T-square here, right, it was and still is opposing our Sun and setting up T-square to our Saturn in our house of national identity. So because T-squares always bring things to a head, there's a lot of power and momentum behind a T-square. So with a Venus-Mars opposing our Sun, there have been, or would have been on this day, we would have reached critical mass, because remember, T-squares are also critical mass. We would have reached critical mass in terms of issues that have a lot to do with A, our leadership, B, real estate. Sun in Cancer also rules real estate and investments, and family, the tribe, as well as, you ready for this? Personal business. So there's some personal, if I'm reading this chart correctly, there are some personal issues involved in this Ukraine business that has nothing to do with the rest of us. This is literally a personal issue. And that is pretty terrifying because, listen, if people have to have a pissing contest, we'd like to let them have a pissing contest, not utilizing armies that involve our children dying. I'm just saying. Okay. Now, with that said, all of this sets up a T-square to our national Saturn. Our national Saturn is in Libra. Saturn in Libra makes us very invested in partnerships and diplomatic alliances. The golden rule is extremely important for us as a nation when it comes to our agreements with other countries. Violation of the golden rule, regardless of how crappy they're being, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. So when we're not following the gold star standard of integrity in our agreements with other countries, right, or our partnerships or our alliances, we get huge consequences from this. We do not get the same amount of latitude other countries do for being crappy or less than integrity driven. So all of this stuff will eventually come home to roost. Sooner or later, it's coming home to roost, and it will come home to roost with interest. So we really have to be aware of that with our international dealings, or rather, our leadership needs to be aware of that in terms of our international dealings. But, what are we going to do, right? Okay, so Saturn in Libra as the leg of this T-square, right? Saturn right here is the fulcrum or the leg of this T-square, really drives home the point that critical mass has been reached in terms of the golden rule, where our partnerships, alliances, and agreements with other people are concerned. So something happened and came to a head on the 12th, where this phone call is concerned, that had a lot to do with our agreements and our partnerships and our alliances with other people in the international community. And because this is Venus and Mars, this looks like a very personal issue, not a national issue, but a personal one. I'm not liking the way this looks. I could be completely wrong. I'm just saying, but it's there, and that's something we need to be aware of. So, uh, oof, hang on while I collect my thoughts here, 'cause now I'm all angsty and panicking. Okay, so the upside of this is because this is Venus and Mars, they're personal planets, they're fast-moving planets, they're weaker planets compared to the big outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. This is something that should blow over relatively quickly, but it is certainly a flag or a puff of smoke coming off the volcano that's warning us there's something huge here that's really fragile at this point, because again, we're talking about Saturn, and Saturn is consequences. Saturn is integrity, it's the golden rule, and it's consequences. In the sign of Libra, it's all about our agreements and partnerships with other people. So we really, it's us that's under the stress test in terms of integrity and partnerships and agreements. Yikes. Okay. And all of this is happening, of course, while we've got this nonsense going on. Mars with Neptune, under stress. So our playing with words and our, couching things and, hidden clauses and all the verbal gymnastics that lawyers do in their contracts that people hate lawyers for, all of those things that we typically ascribe to the worst expressions of lawyers in this country, that is what is even more operative and worse at this time, because it has all come to a head over decades, and now we've reached critical mass with that game playing with words, and at the same time, this is happening. So that's not good. This combination of things is not good. And I hate to say it, but we may have brought it upon ourselves. So hopefully our leadership will get it together and understand that there's much bigger things involved here than our personal petty, pissing contest. All right. At the same time, some things to be aware of is, one, Jupiter is crossing our vertex. So we've got some fated circumstances that will involve our national identity that are going to come into play very, very shortly, probably in the next year or so. You don't want to get caught short with this stuff. You don't want to be juggling all sorts of flaming chainsaws and exploding bombs, in the air like a circus juggler, and then have things come out of the blue from left field at you because Jupiter's on the vertex. So we really need to clean house and get it together now so that we're not caught off guard, and detrimentally so when Jupiter comes around and plays that fickle finger of fate hand to us. Now, at the same time, I know this is not making anybody feel better, is it? I'm only laughing because I'm panicking. We also have transiting Pluto crossing our natal Pluto. Now, the Pluto thing is huge. Oh my God, so freaking huge. And we're going to talk about that separately in the next slide. But just be aware that we've got major, major evolutionary forces at play that require us, the United States as a nation, to do the right thing, to stop mucking around and, playing in, fantasy island with all these things, wishful thinking and things we wish were happening, or even these crazy delusions that we're dealing with, because, JFK never really died, cough, cough, the earth is flat, cough, cough, oh my God. And we've got to come together, and we've got to pull our head out of our collective behinds and see what's happening. And we have to, because remember, the 10th house up here where Mars is the house of leadership. So all of this nonsense, this game playing with words manipulation that has come to critical mass right now and is affecting our partnerships with other countries, this is coming from our leadership. We have got to pay attention, and we've got to hold our feet to the fire, because they are the source of problems. They're game playing. They're not keeping their word. They're playing with agreements and manipulating information and not misrepresenting agreements and all that sorts of, and backpedaling, all the things you would expect from a bad boyfriend or girlfriend. They are the ones responsible for the mess that we're currently in right now, and we need to hold them accountable. But we also need to stop kidding ourselves and playing these games with this nonsense out here. Because the more you pay attention to them and what they're doing, not what they're saying, because everything right now is just a big old bag of tail wagging the dog propaganda. Watch what they're doing. Look at their history. Watch what they're doing. And that is how you hold them accountable, because they'll tell you all kinds of things and none of it's going to be true. It'll be 6 different ways. It's everything we don't like about lawyers in this country. Everything we don't like about lawyers is operative right now at critical mass. And this is what's causing the problem, because that game playing that we see in lawyers that we don't like is coming from the leadership of the government in those leadership positions, the senators, the president, all of his appointees, all of these people. That's where the problem is, and we've got to pay attention and hold them to the fire. You cannot listen to them. You have to watch them and see what they do. That will tell you the truth of the matter, and that's where we have to focus. Okay, so this is the progress chart for the United States. One of the things that you're going to notice with astrologers, is, especially the ones that do mundane or political astrology, is there's a lot of discussion about the Pluto return, or the United States Pluto returning to its original position. So in the progress chart right here, Pluto's at 29 degrees Capricorn. Now our natal Pluto for the United States chart is at 27 Capricorn. So technically, this progressed Pluto has already passed over that point. Now, transiting Pluto as we speak is at 26 degrees Capricorn. So by transit, we've still got a little bit more of this Pluto effect to deal with. Now, this is important because, one, no human being has lived long enough to have a Pluto return that we're aware of, because it takes 247 years for Pluto to come back to its original position. So you'd have to live to be 248 to experience your Pluto return. So we don't have anyone who has living experience with it to tell us how this feels or works. The other thing is that we don't have a lot, we're here in the United States, so we don't really have a lot of information about other people's countries and how they've necessarily experienced their Pluto returns. I mean, we can certainly read the history books, but again, we're limited to the information that we have access to, right? And our priority is always our history, because we're living our future from our history. In any event, the other thing is that with the Pluto return in the United States chart, we are a young country. People often forget that the United States is a baby country compared to other countries and nations. Other countries and nations around the globe have been around forever. The United States as a nation is a fairly recent phenomenon, so it's still in a lot of ways it's not in its infancy anymore, but it's certainly in its teenage years. Okay, so we've got a lot of growing and evolutionary challenges ahead of us because we're still new at this game. With that said, because Pluto, we've got all this Pluto activity happening at the same time right now as we speak. This really, really puts the point on the pencil as far as Pluto activity in our chart. And it can be a little terrifying because Pluto is not fun. Pluto is, if you've ever had a Pluto transit in your life to a personal planet or an angle, you know that Pluto moves through there literally like a force of destruction, ripping away things, upending tables, turning rooms inside out, turning your life upside down, and often can seem cruel and unfair because what it takes away in large destructive measure. There are evolutionary reasons for this, but at the time, this doesn't feel good. So Pluto is the planet that also rules psychoanalysis. And typically after a Pluto transit, you feel like you need a little psychoanalysis. And our country is now going through that. So with this Pluto return, right, and the progressed Pluto and transiting Pluto, all of these things all culminating together in Pluto, one of the things we want to look at is what does this mean for us, because it's a big deal. Hence the discussion many of the astrologers are having about this. With that said, understand that Pluto is the planet that rules the sign Scorpio. We carry, depending on which chart you're using as our national identity, Scorpio rising. So this Pluto transit is involving our first house of national identity. So we are literally, as we speak, having an identity crisis. Yes. And it won't be over anytime immediately. We are going through a process. Now, the good news is that Pluto will change signs in 2050. And it will enter zero Aquarius. And when it does that, everything will change. It'll be a whole brand new playing field. all new, fresh, wide open vistas and horizons. So we will have some new green pasture to move into and much better days ahead because it will be an open, brand new, clean playing field. Right now, as we're going through our Pluto return and Pluto transit and progress Pluto all coming together, culminating together at these last degrees of Pluto, ruling our first house of national identity, giving us a national identity crisis. We are in the process of closing out our history or ending a major cycle or chapter in our nation and our identity. So we are literally moving from an old identity to a new one with all of the things that go with it. The other thing to understand is that Pluto rules the underworld and backroom deals and shady, secret stuff, because Scorpio, man, they're so secretive. So also too, and also Pluto is big money, corporations and big money and dark money. So it's no accident that the big focus and awareness that we have these days about dark money in politics and actively taking positions to deal with this now and stop this nonsense because it's gone too far is absolutely a Pluto transit, progression, return. It's absolutely a Pluto function because the other thing that Pluto also rules is the use and or abuse of power. Pluto also rules exploitation. So all of the keywords, if you want to have some fun, go look up keywords for Pluto. All of the keywords that come under Pluto are literally up for review, and we are actively addressing them now under all these Pluto aspects. And Pluto ruling our first house, all of those keywords as they affect our national identity is absolutely what we are in the throes of right now, which means that we can also expect that the people who have benefited from old systems or the ignorance of the many, people who are in positions to use and or abuse the power available to them, on a large scale or an exploitative scale, are also going to be the ones who are kicking up the biggest resistance right now. And remember, Pluto is a very selfish, isolated planet, so Pluto does not necessarily represent the masses of people. Pluto absolutely represents the select elite few who are in charge of the levers and buttons and controls of the great machine. So there is that. If you want a planet that defines and rules the common man or the everyday people, the masses, the unwashed masses, it's going to be Uranus and Pluto. By the time you get Uranus and Neptune, by the time you get to Pluto, you're literally like a pyramid going up to the top, where it's a very small, limited few that have positions there because there's so little room for anyone else, and they're the ones who are represented by Pluto. So they're definitely going to give us quite the fight for the next few years as we go through this, because nobody ever wants to give up their comfort or their power. You wouldn't want to give up the things you've attained for yourself in terms of your creature comforts. You're not just going to hand them over to somebody because, they said you have to. And it's the same thing with power. Nobody wants to give up their power. Unfortunately, at this time, what we're seeing is that power, that concentrated power in the hands of the few, has been at the expense of the many. This is why you and I, all of us, feel so powerless and have felt so powerless for so long. But that, my friends, is changing. You betcha. So let's get on with the charts. Okay, so we're going to take a break here, and I'm going to set you up for part 2, which will be another video. In part 2, it will be looking backward to move forward. We're going to look at Trump, the Trump administration, and the United States chart, since it's behind us, and we can now go back and examine what we were working with and how these things played out in real life. The thing I want to remind you guys of is that the administration is not the same thing as the president. So because we are a democracy, the administration is its own entity. And with the administration, we use the inauguration chart. So the inauguration chart typically is used to try and determine or suss out like what the presidency is going to be like, but also too, that inauguration chart represents the administration that will be working with the president during his time in office. So when we look at Trump, we're also going to look at the inauguration chart as representative of his administration and their impact on the country, and both of those things together. We're also going to examine how and why Trump became the phenomenon that he did in terms of his hold on the imagination and hopes of many very angry Americans, and where that has come from. So there's a lot here that we're going to unpack in the next video. So make sure you, if you like this video, make sure you like or dislike it, give me feedback. But also remember to subscribe so that you can get notification of the next video as it comes up. And if you enjoyed this and you think it would be worthwhile for someone else to hear it, absolutely share it with them. All right, you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.